our LGBTQ uh, group that started the little employee group of three that now spans 14 countries and is still growing all these years later. That started in 2007. But the International Day of the Lesbian brings to mind the leader of the province I grew up in for quite a few years was Kathleen Wynne, and she and her wife were very passionate about inclusion in all its dimensions. And she always started important gatherings of peoples in acknowledging the first peoples of the territory on which the meeting was convened. So, in deference to International Day of the Lesbian and the native peoples of any country which you happen to be in, frankly, at this moment, I acknowledge that we're gathering today and I'm sitting on the native territories of the Walwan people of California who were here before others came. So, just acknowledging the traditional territories of those peoples as we congregate and bring other people together to talk in an inclusive and safe and embracing way about ideas and stories that are meant to help and inspire. So, I'm Andy, but the focus is on these fabulous people. I'm just going to pop up a slide. Just this easy. Zip, zip. And is it sharing? It is. It had better be sharing. And let me go into this mode. There we go. Okay. So here we are, we're kicking off. There is an invitation, by the way, that is out there on the internet in multiple dimensions. So it's on Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram, and I'm seeing it pop up all over the place. So the four panelists we're about to hear from for the next 55 minutes are now world famous. Who knew? And at this moment, I would invite each of them to introduce themselves. I'm super excited to hear from them. I'll be a gentle guide in the conversation, but it's really about them having a conversation and the rest of us being able to learn from the different perspectives they bring from their different organizations, their different life experiences. So Joni, over to you if you would kindly introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for having me on this wonderful panel. My name is Joni Fu. I go by pronouns of she, her, and my personal mission statement is to make a positive impact and positive difference with everyone that I have the honor to come in interaction with. My day job is the Intel Chief of Staff for the Custom Logic Engineering, and we deploy FPGA, structure ASIC, and custom ASIC to the edge, through the network, and to the cloud. That's me.
Awesome. And Brian, if you would care to start.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Andy. It's actually a pleasure to be here. This is my very first panel discussion to participate in. I'm very happy to be here. I go by the pronouns of he and him. I am currently a QA program manager, quality assurance program manager at Amazon, supporting our sellers who sell through the Amazon platform. Very much looking forward to being here today. And, I think as far as like my personal mantra, it's to try and leave a place better than the way that I found it, in whatever capacity that is.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We're delighted to have you. And Ginger.
Hi, my name is Ginger Chin. My pronouns are she and her. I represent League at AT&T. That's one of the oldest ERGs in the nation. I describe myself as an open mic storyteller. I'm a musician in a trans band, and I'm a cell phone engineer. I think the idea of a mission is a good one. For me, it has always been doing things that build connections and create communications between people. So I'm really excited to be here. Oh, one more thing I wanted to add. I am a chapter president of a PFLAG chapter. PFLAG awesome. Is an organization that helps, in particular, allies such as family, siblings, grandparents be the best family that they can for their children or adults who are in the process of coming out themselves.
Awesome. Thank you, Ginger. And love PFLAG. I know the hoots and hollers and standing ovations for PFLAG at every Pride Parade I've ever been to. So go PFLAG. And Alexis, if you would please.
Hey everyone, my name is Alexis Puck. I work at a company called Frog, which is an international design, strategy, and technology firm, and now a sort of child organization of Capgemini. In my day job, I am the principal director of design there, leading programs as the creative director, but I also wear many hats and I run our internship program. I speak about emerging technologies. I lead the interaction design practice for the Americas, and I sit on our diversity, equity, and inclusion board. Fundamentally, what I love to do is be a teacher and a mentor and help people realize the potential within themselves. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as queer.
Thank you. Thank you all. And with having said that, the lovely Christine Canning from Capgemini's Accelerated Solutions environment is going to pop up a canvas that you will all be seeing momentarily, like now, and there it is. And she will record the conversation as we go. So you'll see the panelists along the bottom, and we are just simply going to have a conversation. And to kick the conversation off, when we were talking about things that might be helpful for people to hear, one of the themes that kept emerging was the theme of allyship, and what does it mean to come out as an ally? So perhaps if we could start with Joni, perhaps just to kick us off with this part of the conversation, what does it mean to come out as an ally, or what do allies coming out mean for you?
So yeah, thank you, Andy. This is actually something very personal, and it was a very pivotal thing for me early in my career. When I joined Intel, I wanted to come out. I was working in 3 other companies, and I couldn't come out, and I was very, very, I would say, depressed. So when I joined Intel, my first boss, his name was Mike, and I decided I'm going to come out. So I told him. I said, hey, Mike, my first one won. My name's Joni, blah, blah, blah. And then I said, look, I want to do something about diversity. So I will be starting something for the LGBTQ ERG in Colorado. But don't treat me differently. I don't want any special treatment. Treat me normally. I don't want to be anything but normal, like you treat everybody else. This is the first ally that I have ever met that changed my life. He said, Joni, why do you want to be ordinary when you can be extraordinary? You have an extraordinary gift that's been given to you, and you need to use that. So he pushed me to start the ERG. He pushed me to go in front of the camera. I learned about media training very early on in my career. I learned about budgeting very early on in my career. I learned about all the things about putting your foot in your mouth and all that stuff. But my point, though, is that ally changed my life, changed my career, changed the trajectory of how I will live my life and my talent. So I cannot say enough of finding ally is the best way to grow your career.
Cool. Does that speak to anyone else on the panel? Prompt any ideas?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and chime in.
For everybody, go ahead.
Okay. The idea of allyship is not all that, coming out as an ally is not all that different as the process of coming out for an LGBTQ person. One of the things that I see over and over is the terror that family members feel when they know that they have to somehow contend with their child or their sibling or their spouse coming out. It is as painful and as difficult because it contains all of the same fears and assumptions that may have interfered with the LGBTQ person coming out being brought to bear on the family members or the coworkers or whatever the allies might be. So I think what I like to remember is that allies may be just as terrified or confused by the process, and it's an extra piece of work that we in the LGBTQ community have to bear to help them along. But it's something that those of us with the energy and the dedication to building that bigger world, we gladly carry that weight and do that work.
Cool.
I kind
So
of
Brian,
love that, and this brought up a couple of different kind of thoughts for me. One from Joni when she's talking about um, the space that her ally, her mentor, gave her to be herself and to excel and get involved in the things that she's passionate about. Um, and then Ginger speaking about like family and the process of our coming out and what that impact is on the people who love us. And you know, I remember growing up, like I grew up in a very like conservative Catholic home. I went to private schools, so there's a lot of conflicting messages around you know, being a gay person. And I think one of the considerations that was important for me in my coming out process was understanding and being empathetic of the same sort of coming out process that was going to have on my parents. And you know, I mean, I was blessed and lucky, and they were understanding and loving, and that never changed. But you know, all of their thoughts and aspirations for me had to be recalibrated to a certain degree. Um, so allyship is very important, but it does definitely have a lot of different. It looks different in a lot of different circumstances.
there we go.
So if you don't mind, Andy, I'm gonna call out kind of 3 hard facts to kind of double
Sure.
down on Bryant's theme of empathy here. I think it's important for people to realize that until 2003, gay sex was still illegal in 13 United States states. Until 2015, gay marriage was illegal in the United States. And until this year, 2020, gay people could legally be fired in the United States. And there are still many states that are right to work states. So I wanted to kind of call that out because as allies, it's important to be empathetic. It's important to listen to us and understand our stories and recognize that what we're telling you are truths, whether or not you can relate to them or whether or not you have similar experiences as us. It's important to remember to not assume that we all have the same rights and the same benefits and have lived the same experiences that you have. So we are all different, and especially as we work in diverse and inclusive companies and we think about how we can celebrate each other through equitable environments, we are all people and we need to pay attention to how we can work together and really celebrate one another and not take those assumptions at face value.
Alexis, if I may, it prompts a question in my mind that I would love the perspective of the panelists. How do you help allies become their full selves? I mean, is it on them to figure it out? Should we have programs, or how do we figure that out? I would love to learn from all of you, your thoughts on that.
So I'll share a story on that. One of the things that I've found effective after the first step of realizing that some allies are simply not where Joni's manager Mike was. I mean, he was ready to go and very much knew what to do, but not all allies are there. And the things that get in the way of people's movement is often fear. And one thing I've learned is that people, if you look at people's fears and their procrastinations and the things that cause them to delay taking action, it comes down to, if you play them out to the extreme, just a couple things. There's the fear of dying, of course, but there's also the fear of being alone or the fear of being isolated, and we all share that. And I was able to use that, so I'm going to share a little success story. As the president of the PFLAG chapter that I volunteer for, one of the things that came up a couple years ago was an opportunity to speak to the Bellevue City Council. That's a large, wealthy city, the heart of business in a suburb of Seattle. And they were toying with the idea of issuing a pride proclamation, which would have been a great sign of allyship. They were not clear on exactly how to do that, other than making sure they were legally protected. And so I came before the city council and I told them a story about what it's like growing up as someone who's LGBTQ in this shiny upscale city and still feeling unsafe and still not feeling seen. And they really took to that. They really understood. There were some women on the council, and there were people from minority backgrounds on the council, and they kind of understood what it felt like to be invisible and how important symbols were. And through that, I was able to perhaps ignite their a deep value that they had about inclusion, which overcame their fear of being looked at with a side eye by certain people in the city. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson I took from that, was to come to a meeting with people at some kind of a shared value, whether it's empathy, whether it's community, it's there. There's going to be something that you can find, and to build on that.
Thank you. Now, does that evoke anything in any of our other panelists?
I totally agree that I think the coming out as an ally is like coming out as LGBTQ. It's a process. It actually is not a one-time thing. It's not like someone says, okay, I'm an ally, and that's the end all be all. They actually have to learn their steps to be an ally. They actually have to get the vocabulary right. They have to actually understand our issues and actually kind of in a way live out how we live. So I'll talk about my story 20 years after I joined Intel, and I have the privilege of serving a few executives in my role. And this is my proudest moment this year, so I'm like all excited about this. I started working for my executive 3 years ago. I came out to him like I usually do, you know, hey, I'm gay. I'm going to be working on these ERG things and diversity and inclusion things. And he used to stay quiet. He said, of course. And that was the end of it, right? I'm senior enough. He's going to leave me alone and all that. The first 3 months, we had no connection. We didn't talk about anything. We would just get work done. The second, so I was strategic. I want to do something because I know he's a powerful man at Intel. He's very influential. I need to do something with this man. So the second 3 months, I start asking him questions. What did you do on the weekend? Oh, you have a wife. What does your wife do? Oh, you have two kids. What does your 2 kids do? So I learned that his kids are swimmers, chess players, violinists. I also learned about his wife works at Nike and all that stuff. And I got to know him, but he never asked about me. So the second 3 months, I started offering. Hey, what'd you do this weekend? He told me. Then I'll go, yeah, my wife and my kid did this. And I just start offering information. My kid plays soccer, plays volleyball. We went hiking. We went to Utah and Bryce Canyon, and then start telling him stories about me. The third 3 months in, he started asking me questions. Hey, how's your wife? How's your kid? He's more comfortable now. More exposure, more comfort. And I absolutely with you, Ginger. You have to get past that fear because he doesn't know how to have that conversation. Then started telling him about my camping trip. I went to Colorado and I was scared about using the restroom. He couldn't understand why. I said, well, because I look androgynous and I am in fear of my physical safety when I'm outside of my bubble of being in the gay area. He was shocked. He was like, I never thought about that. I said, yeah, but that's why we're pushing for the all gender restroom at Intel. Why do you think we were doing that for? Right. And so it was that kind of conversation education. But my breakthrough, Ginger, came in 2018 when Intel and AT&T co-hosted an event at the flagship of place in San Francisco, and I invited him and his daughter to come to that event. And I have 2 tickets, and I said, hey, you should come. And he's like, who's going to be there? I go, of course, all the gay crowd, my family. You're going to come and meet my family. And he went. This is a traditional conservative person. And he took his daughter, and we had a grand old time. He met my family, and it was eye-opening. So to get to the end, why I'm so proud this year, I'm stepping down as the executive sponsor for our ERG chapter in San Jose, and he will now be the executive sponsor as our chapter in that. And this is a great story of an ally from not knowing anything to actually now becoming active and using his power to help us.
Yeah, I love these stories of like education and growth and helping allies learn more about themselves in becoming an ally or wanting to discover that that was a thing. I think what is also important to remember is, especially for individuals who are visibly queer or visibly out, it can be really easy to treat us as like the de facto queer expert. Like, oh, what should we do here? Should we get restrooms? Are we solving for trans needs? Like, what is this question here? And as much as I enjoy participating in those discussions, because I'm participating with you all today, it is still an emotional toll, an emotional burden. And I don't know everyone's sexuality and their gender and their intersectionalities. So you can't also assume that I can just be that one-off representative. You have to educate yourself, and there are so many resources out there. And I don't say this to like scare allies or potential allies away from asking questions, but you need to do the work yourself in addition to engaging us.
I think it's also really important and it is definitely a two-way conversation, is to be able to provide, safe spaces so that these conversations can happen. Joni clearly did that with her boss, and it became reciprocal. And his being open to share his family history with her and vice versa, it really does come from a place of building a safe space, and open. I think open dialogues actually also come from that. Like, I am perfectly happy to ask questions if somebody feels comfortable enough to ask me certain questions, and vice versa. And I think that safe space also does play a huge part in our ability to come out, whether it's, coming out is such a constant process. It's never like a one and done kind of thing, because you can start a job and come out and work there for a while, and it's just sort of a known situation. But if you change roles, change jobs, move into a different team, you get to do it all over again. And you have to also create that safe space for yourself to allow yourself to be, who you authentically are. And it really is just an ongoing process.
If I may, I'm this theme of recurrence, like again and again and again, you're coming out perpetually. I'd love if this inspires anyone on the panel, your thoughts or observations or experiences with two dimensions: coming out as a leader of a team and what that felt like, and where were you in your own mind as you're coming out to a team of people that you can impact their careers, and obversely coming out to people who can impact your career because they're your boss or the executive of your company. Does that evoke anything in any of our panelists?
Well, one of the big things or messages for me is that it does depend a lot on corporate culture. If you work for a company that embraces diversity and allows, really champions that as a message and part of their corporate culture, again, it goes back to creating that safe space where us as leaders can be ourselves without any fear of repercussion or possible consequences. So again, as far as a managing teams and managing people, I think it really does sort of start at the top, with your work environment, with a company that embraces you and appreciates diversity and different perspectives and different orientations.
And I'd like to add on to that. The leadership aspect is so important. But what's interesting is if you look at it a little deeper, there are leaders who are somewhat passive, and then there are those who are very active. And what do I mean by that? A passive leader might be one who instructs people to do the annual diversity training. An active leader takes that to a whole new level and is not only living and walking and talking those values, but might even go so far. And just imagine how your sense of safety would change if you heard a leader say, these are our policies, but more important than that, these are my personal values about inclusion and equity. And I, as a leader, I want to surround myself with people who have that wider perspective and who are inclusive of others. That would be a very transformative kind of statement. And it's something that I've had the opportunity to see from some of AT&T's leaders. And it truly changed both my perception of the safety of a space. And if it's coming from a leader, it is organization wide. That's the power of their leadership energy. But even as individuals, we have the power to change the space in our immediate surroundings with those that we work with by making similar statements. And that's difficult for an ally. Maybe start small with a pride squishy ball on your desk or something, but that means the world to someone. If there's a parent who has a trans kid and has no resources to go to in their town, just to know that there's someone at work in whom they might be able to confide about their biggest and immediate fears about the safety of their kid would be an incredible bonding experience that can really create trust among people in an organization.
Yeah, I might add that I've lived most of my life, most of my professional working life, unapologetically authentic. And I present my masculinity and femininity on a spectrum. I can have an ambiguous gender presentation. I have facial piercings. This is how I interview. And if you want to work with me, great. I'm super professional and we'll get the job done. But these are the aspects that make up my life. But as outspoken and sure of myself and authentic as I can be, because of the way that I might present my gender in an ambiguous form, I, on very professional calls, will get misgendered and someone will sir me when they should ma'am me. And there's this weird moment of a sir, ma'am, like apology or nothing. They'll call me sir, and then it's quiet. So I think as leaders and coworkers, as awkward as that might be for you to know that I've been misgendered, I have to deal with that microaggression and figure out what my next steps are. Do I say something? Do I see if it naturally gets fixed along the way? Do we see what happens with that client and keep talking to them in different formats? Or do you step up and you say, oh, Alexis is a woman, or you find another way to bring up my gender in an appropriate manner without leaving that burden on myself? It's an awkward and it's a very difficult step to take for an ally, and I realize I'm touching myself and like hitting my thing, but for you to take that step and for me to recognize that you have my back and are willing to put yourself out there to make something right means so much to people who have consistently been misgendered or treated as a marginalized person in some way. So think about taking those leaps of faith, even if they're difficult, to find those ways to support in the moment.
I absolutely agree, Alexis, and thank you. That was very, very touching. I'm actually tearing up right now because I can actually think of how many times I've been misgendered in my career as well. But I think Brian, Ginger, and Alexis, I think a lot of time this is a chicken and egg situation, right? The more we come out, the more visible we are, the easier it is for other people to come out. So recently I was having a conversation with a couple of senior leaders, and they asked me, what's in it for you, Joni? In corporate America, that is the number one question, right? What's in it for you? Why do you come out? What's your value? What do you get out of it, right? And I did. I really had to. I stopped and go, okay, that's a good question. Yeah, why? Why do I come out? Other than, I need to be authentic, right? That's a personal value. But what's in it for me personally? So I actually then concluded in three ways. I said, when I come out, I give hope. I give hope to the new and junior employees that this is a safe environment and that you can progress and advance being yourself. No need to hide. And having a visible senior leader out there is going to give that hope to others. Because I didn't have that hope earlier in my career. I had a great ally in Mike, but I didn't have any other visible role model that I could see how to progress. So I want to show that trailblazing. The second thing for me is actually it opened up doors and connectivity that I would never imagine. When I come out, my family members come out. I have people that would reach out to me, Joni, thank you for coming out. From different groups that didn't tell, where they would come and tell me that they appreciated me coming out, and we start building relationships. I get to keep pulse on the organization that no other executives can. I actually understand across Intel over 25,000 people that's in my organization, up and down the organization, of what's going on, because I've built that trust with my family members that's willing to come to me and tell me about that. So that's good for me. But most importantly is, as an out senior leader, I have a platform to influence policies and processes within my company to make sure that the benefits and the actual equitable treatment of our organization is going to extend to LGBTQ employees. And that is actually one of the things that's very, very important to me, to be out. Not for myself, but for the rest of the organization and for everyone that's coming, coming after me, that they actually get the chance to thrive at Intel.
Yeah, I would just 100% agree, Joni. Like, the being out and being authentic and being outspoken is that representation where even if I can't identify with you one-to-one, I've got something that connects us, when so often, so many times in our careers or childhood or the people that we learn from don't represent us in any way. So it's so important to be able to find those spaces, especially with senior leadership, to show that it is a safe space and you can be out and you can be proud and you can be okay as an ally or as someone within the queer community.
A couple of themes that sort of keep coming up for me is, like, one, we keep sharing how visibility matters, and it really does, because it makes us, it does create that safe space for people who, may not be as comfortable in their sexuality as we are. And the other part of that is, when I sign on to do my job, like, if I was to hold back like a piece of who I am by not coming out, not giving 100% of me, and that's something that I commit to doing in my relationships, in my work environment, in my performance. Like, when I commit to something, I'm going to commit to it 100%, and that is every piece of me, every my gayness, my straightness, my creativity, my analytical side, not so much analytical side, but all of that is what makes me, like, special, and it's what I bring to the table, and it's what my contribution can be.
Yeah, I mean, not to get all business metric-y, right? But I'm like, if you're spending 20-30% of your time like hiding a whole portion of who you are, like, efficiency in the workplace is decreasing, because that takes like mental energy and physical willpower to like, oh, don't say that thing, and like constantly check and catch yourself is exhausting, and it takes time away from time well spent.
Yeah, that's self-censorship, absolutely.
Yeah, it totally affects the quality of technical product as well. If I see a flawed data structure that is not capable of capturing, say, gender diversity, I'm at a risk. If I'm still hiding, if I'm still closeted, I'm at a risk at pointing out that defect, because I don't know if people are going to suddenly raise their eyebrows and question, how did you know that? And so the opportunity to be authentic and to be safe really does bring in perspectives that come at problems from upside down and sideways directions that most people just aren't able to see. And it's not their fault. They just don't have that experience to be able to see those issues. I did want to add one little piece about inspiration. And when I was, so let's see, how do I want to start this? I'll start this with my band. So when I play in my band, our fan base is this little rural coastal town in Washington State. It's mainly logging and fishing. And the people who stagger into the bars late at night are occasionally boatloads of fishermen, for example. But the town has come to know us. And even though we're outrageously and visibly trans on stage, they understand that we as leaders in that space are defining the terms of the space. And they know that they're going to get kicked out by the venue if they misbehave. So they let their guard down too, and they can enjoy us. And I remember one scene in which there was a mosh pit in front of this little stage, and all of these burly guys were doing their thing in the mosh pit, as well as an elderly grandmother with her silver hair and her chunky white tennis shoes. She was there too. And it tells me that this kind of authenticity draws people out. Now, I was able to have that proved true to me when I came out at work. It wasn't quite as obvious because people are still kind of shy at work. But one person came up, after I came out, one person came up to me and said, "I wish I had your courage. Maybe I'll find it someday." That's inspirational. And if I can at least leave that nugget of hope with someone, that's awesome. And I don't know what they were struggling with. It may not have had anything to do with being trans, but something about me being authentic and taking the risk for myself was giving them some strength. And even that little tiny example is enough for me to know that there's a lot bubbling under the surface that I don't get to see as I do in the band, but in the workplace, I believe it's happening too. And that fuels me. It really keeps me going with this kind of work.
Let me share a story about going back to the closet, because I actually been out since I joined Intel. And then in 2008, I was on an expat assignment to China to start the factory in China. So Intel's awesome. They were very, very kind. They got my immigration. Our baby was only 6 months old. My wife decided that, we decided that she needs to quit her job and then actually come with me because she wants to spend time with the baby. So it was just perfect timing. Intel was wonderful. Intel took care of all of our visa, took care of our house, and that my wife and my daughter could come with me as a family. And it was just a wonderful thing. But we had a meeting before we went to China, before we got on the plane. And the Intel folks pretty much just kind of said, "Joni, we can protect you when you're on the Intel campus, but we cannot protect you when you're outside of the campus." And it pretty much meant to me that I have to go back to the closet. So, being very naive at the time, I thought, okay, fine, I'll go back to the closet, no problem. I'll remember my story. So I have 4 stories I have to remember. 1, my wife is not my wife anymore. She's my best friend. 2, she's my business partner because we own some real estate that we rent out. Okay. 3, my daughter is an adopted daughter because biologically that's my wife and she's my wife's a biological child, but I adopted her. So that's all true. I'm telling you the truth. All the compartmentalization were all true. And 4, my best friend's here with me to take care of my adopted daughter. That's the story that I told. But I could never imagine going back to the closet and the the mental and emotional fatigue I feel every day when I come back from work. It's very hard. It's parallel processing. I almost have to process that part of my life separately from where I was. And I do a lot of technical element of the fab startup where we're building this, semiconductor plant. And I remember I can't focus on who I am, but I just pretty much have to split myself into 2 and doing that work. And I will tell you, when we came back and 4 years later, we came back to the US, we actually had to go to marriage counseling because my wife was going through post-traumatic disorder as well. She couldn't be out as my wife, so she was treated as a second class citizen as well when she was in China. And it was the most amazingly terrifying thing for us. I will never go back to the closet again. I will never live inauthentically again because it was just not worth it.
Yeah, that's incredible, right? It's so traumatizing. I think at least working at a consultancy right now, I have the luxury of saying no to participating with certain clients, right? And we do business all over the world. And sometimes clients are in countries where being gay is illegal or even punishable by death. And I'm like, y'all, I understand this is a really great opportunity, but I am not at all willing to put myself anywhere near that position because it's not worth it. And I'm very lucky to have a company that gives me those luxuries in opting out. Joni, that is brutal. Thank you so much for sharing.
I was naive. I thought I could take it. Could not.
Now to this Alexis, I thank you for throwing some facts out in the mix in the course of the conversation to say 2020 was the year in these United States when it became illegal to fire someone for being LGBTQ. Think about that. Until this year, a company could legally terminate your employment based on that. Or you couldn't legally be married 5 years before that. And then these expressions of traveling to other parts of the world where it is still that way, and other parts of this country where it is still that way. It may be legally okay, but this business of, I'd love to hear from the panel, anyone else with experiences of this having to not be you as you travel for work. And
I can say a couple words about that. This will be pretty brief. When I was traveling during what I would say was my most vulnerable coming out phase, shortly after I'd come out as trans, the challenge, of course, was how to get through TSA with the body scanning system that arbitrarily uses algorithms that are chosen by the agent who pushes a pink or a blue button to load the right algorithm to judge things like height, weight, body proportions, all of that stuff. And that's a terrifying prospect, to know that your fate in whether or not you're going to make your business trip is in the fingertip of someone who's making a judgment call as to what your quote biological gender is. And the thing is it's a very flawed system, because there are people who simply don't have conforming bodies, regardless of what their background is. So those risks, they extend beyond just employment. They extend into something as terrifying as being pulled aside by TSA. On the other hand, when people begin to understand, they can learn, they can be trained, they can develop compassion for the people they interact with, and it can get better. It absolutely can get better, but it is a slow process, and it takes time to change people's attitudes. Honestly, we're asking, with all of the changes that we face culturally today, we're asking for changes to take place in a matter of years, when in the past it would have taken 2 or 3 generations for a similar degree of change to take place. So there is a lot of discomfort, and I just want to acknowledge that for anyone who's on the call who occasionally feels uncomfortable about some of these things. It is a challenge just because of how fast things are moving.
Now, if I may, you're bringing up for me, and it's not about me, I'll ask the question of you, but example, my husband and I live in a suburb of San Francisco. So in San Francisco, I could probably reach out and hold his hand. But out here, surprisingly, an hour outside San Francisco, we were refused service at a restaurant not too long ago because the server wasn't comfortable with a couple of people that are the same sex with rings on. And the manager apologized to Blue Streak, but just they weren't serving us in 2020. Or no, it was before COVID, so 2019 probably. So just from a coming out in the community, being out in the community, what does that mean for you? I'd love to maybe pivot a little bit away from the work world, given that we only have a few more minutes together, and talk about, I'm Ginger, when you're saying, there we are with Fisherman and my band, and we're totally having a great time together. And that's out as out can be in the community. I'd love to hear from the panel. Any other thoughts on that?
I mean, I think my wife and I, again, try to live as authentically as possible. And part of that is representation. And part of that is our stance on activism. Like, we are here and we are queer and we're going to keep going forward. And if you don't like us holding hands on the street, like, you can say something about it or keep walking. With that in mind, though, we definitely take stock of where we opt in to spend our money and position ourselves in the community. So we look for inclusive spaces. We look for any kinds of representation or signage in windows and things like that, which doesn't necessarily say that we only ever go to gay places. But if you look in some situation, and yes, we are absolutely making surface level snapshot judgments, but sometimes we would look into a place and be like, let's not go there. Let's try another venue. And those are absolutely assumptions that we're making as well. But in some instances, we do so based on the safety that we have to create for ourselves, knowing that we've experienced trauma in our lives around our queerness and how we can either avoid that or make sure that we're positioning ourselves to potentially endure that trauma again for a reason.
I think safety is really it's important. Like, we just had the anniversary of the death of Matthew Shepard, who was out in a bar and literally murdered because of his orientation. And I think that a lot of us on the panel are fortunate that we live in progressive and moderately accepting communities. Like, I mentioned I live in Los Angeles, but I specifically live in West Hollywood. It's a very gay-centric community. So me and my partner of 14 years don't hesitate to display affection in public. But we also travel around the world, and we don't display that everywhere that we go, out of safety.
I just wanted to remind people that allies experience a lot of this too. Allies who voice support can face a lot of backlash. It might come from their employer, maybe a different employer, who realizes that the ally is speaking up on behalf of an LGBTQ person, and that employer doesn't like what they're seeing and takes action against the ally. It might be in the ally's family. It can take all different kinds of forms, and allies face very real risks as well. It happens that there is federal legislation that's halfway through the process. It's getting stuck at some important points in that legislative process, but there is legislation that recognizes that allies face struggles too, and that there could be legal protection for their jobs and against harassment. We're all working towards the same thing, to allow people to be themselves, the LGBTQ individuals, their families, their friends, and there just doesn't seem to be any other way for this arc to go, in my mind.
Thank you for that, Ginger. So with our few minutes remaining, one quick story and pivot into one other line of inquiry, if I may. Um, I played football in high school and was the biggest closet case in the world. And years later, when social media started to bloom and classmates were finding each other on Facebook and all of that sort of thing, it turned out that one of my teammates lived in Toronto. We grew up in a tiny little town 2 hours away from Toronto, but he was in Toronto with his wife. I was in Toronto. So I had the opportunity to go and have coffee. And he said, well, what are you married? Do you have children? Well, yes, I'm married. And yes, we have children. Well, actually, they're my husband's children. And he paused and said, your husband's children? Well, yes, he had two children when I met him. And, we've been together for years at that point. And for me, it was this weird, all of a sudden, I'm in a locker room as a 14-year-old kid again because he was there when I was. And he said one of the most, for me, meaningful moments in my life, probably because he evoked that 14-year-old version of me. He said, Andy, I'm so glad you didn't come out to me when we were playing football because I would have been a teenage idiot and I wouldn't have been respectful and kind. And and humbly, I'll share. He said, my perception of you all the way through high school was you were super smart, you were kind to everyone, you helped the kids that needed help. And I thought you were the greatest guy there was. And I was right, but I would have been an idiot had you shared with me that you liked boys. And so I would love for you, panel, to reflect on, is there an experience or any advice or any learning that you would share if you could look at your 14-year-old self and say, here's something to know now to carry with you through life? Any advice to your younger self?
I guess I can start. This is a hard one for me because I feel like I've lived a pretty blessed life. I was so nervous to come out to my parents, and they were totally cool. Like, not a problem, super supportive. Like, my household stayed together and everything was fine. And I absolutely know that is not the case for everyone. I think what is maybe advice for me, that blessed child who had that supportive family, was to trust in your family and have faith that they do love you and that they are there to support you. I think the years of agony and hiding that I went through because I didn't know if they would accept me or not was kind of years wasted sharing my real self with my family. And now I hear stories from my dad when he meets up with he races cars on the weekends. So he's with his racing bros, and he'll tell them about his daughter and, her wife and our family. And they're like, what? And he's like, yeah, you can either get on board or we don't need to talk anymore. And just the pride that he has in me and my brother, and also my relationship with my wife, still knowing that I'm queer and I'm out and I look like this every day is just incredible. And the joy and the pride that he takes in still sharing me with other people in his life, even if they're not as accepting as he is just really an incredible growth to see in my parents as well.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll go next. Yeah, so I'll go next. I will tell my teenage self that you are enough. You are good enough. You are enough being who you are. The reason I would say that to myself is because I've always felt I was not enough. I was abnormal. I was a freak. I was not. There's something wrong with me throughout this whole thing. And so I want to tell my teenage self that I am enough. I'm good enough, and that's it. That's the easiest advice that I want to give me.
I think if I were to tell myself something, I came out sort of later in life, in my mid-20s. If I was going to tell my teenage self something, is have the fortitude to accept yourself and and be true to who you are.
Cool.
Yeah, I think my advice, interestingly, would apply to my 14-year-old self, but it would also apply to my 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old self. And the thing is at every stage of my life, I was always living with the fear of losing it all, whether it was losing my Chinese immigrant community or losing the college scholarship or one thing after another. There was always the fear of losing so much given the attitudes about being trans at the time. And what I would tell my younger self, and it's still something I have to tell myself today, because it's easy to feel regrets over decisions that weren't made in time. But the advice would be, you're doing the best with what you have. You're doing the best with the power that is in your hands. And both of those are going to grow over time. And you will be victorious in finding yourself. Whatever decision you make, as hard as it is to come to, you'll make that decision. And it'll be made just in time.
That's a magnificent thing. And now, one of the things we often do at the ends of these panels, there will be a flurry of comments in the notes. So I would ask everyone not to put anything in chat at this moment. I'm going to drop something into the chat. So if you can hold off, and I would encourage this panel to watch so if everybody can hold off on dropping anything in the chat for just a moment, hold on. I'm going to click on the magic button and just simply drop in a very simple question. If you love this panel of amazing humans that just shared themselves with you, please put a heart, show love on the message I just dropped in there. Not other messages, but just literally put a heart on that message. And once you've done that, then if you do have a personal note you want to share with this panel of gratitude, I would invite the panel to just quietly, for a few minutes, sit and read through what you did. And on that note, we're at the top of the hour, respectful of everyone's time, but we will share the extract of those comments with our panelists so that you can see what an hour of your life invested in spreading love and information and compassion and kindness and inclusive language and understanding of us to others, and hopefully an hour that we'll look back on and smile about. So thank you all so very much. I'm so grateful on behalf of Outfront at Capgemini. Thank you so very much to our panelists. You've been extraordinary, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again. Cheers. Bye all.